Naomi Caldwell had built her empire from scratch. A black woman at the helm of a luxury car brand in an industry dominated by legacy names, she shattered barriers to prove that hard work and perseverance could trump prejudice. But one fateful visit to her own Beverly Hills showroom would uncover a shocking truth. Her brand wasn't as inclusive as she thought. What happened next shook the entire automotive world. Don't miss the twist in this unbelievable story. Hit subscribe to witness Naomi's battle for justice. Naomi sat behind her desk, her fingers tracing the edge of the letter once again. The words burned into her mind like a scar. A customer had written in, David Williams, a loyal admirer of Caldwell Motors for years. He had come into the Beverly Hills showroom, eager to purchase one of her high-end cars, only to be treated with cold indifference. Despite his financial readiness, he was steered away from the luxury models, subtly dismissed as if he didn't belong. Meanwhile, a white customer dressed no differently was whisked away to a private viewing, offered drinks, and shown the cars Naomi had worked so hard to build. The injustice of it hit her like a punch to the gut. Caldwell Motors had always stood for equality. It was her brand, a symbol of hard work, determination, and inclusivity. She had created it from the ground up, with the belief that everyone, regardless of background, deserved access to the best. But this letter, this one piece of evidence, suggested the very opposite was happening under her watch. Naomi's chest tightened as she read the final lines. If this is how you allow customers to be treated, then perhaps I was wrong. She had promised to create something different, yet somehow her vision had been betrayed. Her mind raced, the weight of the decision ahead pressing down on her. She wasn't the type to take things lying down, not when it came to her company, not when it came to justice. But this was personal. Naomi wasn't just a CEO, she was a symbol, a voice for the marginalized in an industry that often refused to listen. This wasn't just a complaint, this was a fracture in the very core of what she had built. She couldn't ignore it. Not now, not ever. With a deep breath, Naomi picked up her phone and dialed her assistant, Daniel Harper. He had been with her long enough to understand the unspoken language between them, the urgency in her tone even before she said a word. Daniel, Naomi said, her voice steady but laced with determination. Book me a flight to Los Angeles, first thing tomorrow morning. No announcements, no press, just a quiet trip. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Daniel responded. Are we talking business or personal, Naomi? Personal, she said, her voice calm but resolute. I need to see something for myself. The next morning, as the plane ascended through the clouds, Naomi's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The city she had fought for, the one she had built with her own two hands, was a battlefield, and it was time for her to confront the demons hiding within it. But what would she find? Would it be the same world she had once imagined, or had the battle for equality been lost without her realizing? As she stepped out of the black SUV in Los Angeles, the bright California sun hit her skin like a slap. Beverly Hills was everything she had imagined. Pristine, polished, perfect. Luxury cars lined the streets like soldiers in formation, their shiny exteriors a stark contrast to the raw truth Naomi was about to uncover. She dressed simply, deliberately avoiding anything that might hint at her true identity. Today, she wasn't Naomi Caldwell, the billionaire CEO. She was just another customer, hoping to experience the brand she had created as anyone else would. She walked into the showroom, the cool air immediately hitting her face, the subtle scent of leather, and fresh espresso mingling in the air. The showroom gleamed under the soft lighting, the cars like works of art. Beautiful, flawless, untouchable. Naomi's eyes swept the room, looking for something familiar, something that could tell her this place was as inclusive as it claimed to be. But the faces around her, staff dressed in pristine suits, customers who looked as though they belonged, told her a different story. Not a single face looked like hers. A receptionist with a practiced smile greeted her. Welcome to Caldwell Motors. How can I assist you today? Naomi smiled back, her heart beating just a little faster. I'd like to take a look at the Bugatti Chiron Super Sport, she said, her voice calm but firm. The receptionist hesitated, a brief flicker of doubt crossing her face before she quickly recovered. Let me check with our sales team, she said before walking away. Naomi didn't need to be told. She felt the judgment in that small moment. It was subtle, but it was there, as if she wasn't quite the right kind of customer. Minutes passed. Naomi watched, her eyes scanning the room as a tall, well-dressed man approached her. Richard Langford, the showroom manager. She recognized him immediately, the man who controlled the air of exclusivity that filled this place. Ma'am, he greeted her smoothly, his eyes quickly scanning her outfit, his demeanor cool and analytical. I understand you're interested in the Bugatti Chiron Supersport? That's right, Naomi replied, her gaze steady. She could feel the weight of his stare, the way he was sizing her up, not as a customer but as someone who might not belong. Do you have an appointment? Richard asked, his smile polite but lacking warmth. I wasn't aware that was necessary, Naomi said, raising an eyebrow. Well, for certain models, we typically schedule private viewings, Richard said, the words smooth but carrying an edge of condescension. These cars are highly exclusive. Naomi held his gaze, the truth slowly sinking in. I understand, but I'd still like to see it. Richard hesitated, then gestured to one of his younger employees. Please, show her around, he said, his voice losing its earlier warmth as he turned and walked away. Naomi knew then. This wasn't an accident. This was the system at work. She wasn't here to just buy a car. She was here to expose the ugly truth beneath the surface of Caldwell Motors, and she was ready to fight for it. Maria Torres stood in the back of the showroom, her eyes darting from one customer to another, her mind racing. She had worked at Caldwell Motors for over 2 years, and in that time she had learned one thing above all else: never question the system. The unwritten rules were clear, and as long as you followed them, everything ran smoothly. But now, as she watched Naomi Caldwell, her boss, the very woman who had built this company, walk through the showroom, something inside her shifted. Maria had seen this kind of thing before. Customers of color, dressed sharply, full of confidence, being quietly steered toward the lower-end models, as if they couldn't possibly afford the high-end cars on display. It was subtle, a glance here, a redirection there, but Maria knew exactly what was happening. She had learned to keep her head down, to smile and nod, to do her job without rocking the boat. The fear of retaliation loomed over her every day. After all, this was a luxury brand, and luxury was built on exclusivity, on the idea that some people just didn't belong. Yet something in Naomi's calm demeanor unnerved her. Naomi didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She simply observed. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that the woman standing in front of her wasn't just a CEO. She was a force, a woman who had fought through the same barriers Maria herself had faced, but had somehow come out the other side stronger. Naomi wasn't the type to accept things the way they were. Maria had seen that fire in her eyes when she spoke to the board, when she made decisions that shifted the tides. Naomi had the kind of power Maria had only dreamed of. But that power had a price. Maria clenched her jaw as she saw Richard Langford approach Naomi. She had worked with Richard long enough to know the way he sized people up, the way his gaze swept over their clothes, their posture, their demeanor. He was a predator, and Naomi was the prey. Richard's smile was smooth, practiced, too practiced for Maria's liking. She watched as he greeted Naomi, asking about her interest in the Bugatti Chiron Supersport, his voice dripping with false politeness. Maria could feel the tension rising in her chest. She knew what was coming. She could already hear Richard's voice in her head, dismissing Naomi the way he had dismissed so many others before her, redirecting her to lower-end cars, to models that weren't worthy of someone like Naomi. But this time, it was different. Naomi wasn't just any customer. She wasn't the type to take no for an answer. Maria turned away, her fingers gripping the tablet in her hand, her pulse quickening. She had seen Richard's tactics before, the way he kept customers in their place, but something about the way he was treating Naomi felt wrong. It wasn't just about the cars. It was about respect, about belonging. Naomi deserved to be treated like any other wealthy customer, but instead, she was being judged by her appearance, her skin color, her identity as a woman of color in a world that still didn't seem ready to accept her. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she thought about her own place in the system. She wasn't naive. She knew the rules. She had grown up learning to accept things as they were, to swallow the insults and the slights and keep moving forward. But Naomi's quiet strength, her refusal to accept the way things had always been, made Maria wonder, could I do the same? Could she too stand up against the system that had kept her in line for so long? Or was she doomed to remain another invisible cog in a machine that never cared for people like her? As Naomi calmly observed, Maria couldn't help but feel a rising sense of guilt. She had been complicit in this system of exclusion for too long, letting herself become numb to the subtle discrimination happening around her. She had watched it happen every day, but had never had the courage to do anything about it. And now, Naomi, the very woman who had fought to build a company based on merit and equality, was walking into the lion's den, knowing full well what would happen. Maria could sense the weight of Naomi's every step, the tension in the air, as if Naomi was about to tear down everything Maria had ever known. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to help, wanted to step in, but she was trapped. If she spoke up, if she acted against Richard or anyone else in the showroom, she knew the consequences. She had seen what happened to people who tried to rock the boat. They were silenced, pushed out, made to feel small. It wasn't just the threat of losing her job. It was the threat of being blacklisted from an industry that didn't have room for people like her. Her family depended on her income, and the idea of losing everything was enough to keep her in line. But watching Naomi today, sitting calmly in that lounge, watching the discrimination unfold before her eyes without saying a word, Maria felt something stir deep inside her. Naomi wasn't just sitting there as a passive observer. She was watching, learning, planning. Maria could see it in her eyes. Naomi had come here for a reason, to expose the system, to show the world what really happened behind those gleaming doors. The realization hit Maria like a bolt of lightning. Naomi was playing the game, but she was playing it on her own terms. And in that moment, Maria knew that if Naomi could fight, maybe she could too. Maria walked to the back of the showroom, her mind racing. She had seen enough. She had made up her mind. Something had to change, but as she passed the office where Richard stood, she felt her breath catch in her throat. She had crossed the line. She had chosen a side. There was no going back now. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Naomi. Maria. Naomi's voice was calm but firm. I saw what happened today. I know what you've been dealing with here, and I want you to know you're not alone in this. Maria stopped dead in her tracks, her heart pounding. Could this really be happening? Naomi Caldwell, the woman who had built an empire from the ground up, was offering her a way out? Naomi's voice softened. You've been strong, Maria, but now it's time for all of us to fight together. Maria stared at her phone, Naomi's words echoing in her mind, but the weight of the conversation sank in slowly, each word like a stone dropped into the pit of her stomach. You're not alone in this. The idea seemed so foreign, so impossible, to her. Naomi Caldwell, the powerful CEO, the woman who had everything, was extending her hand to someone like Maria, someone small, someone expendable. And yet, despite the fear that gnawed at her insides, despite the terror of what it would mean to stand up, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment she had been waiting for. The showroom buzzed with activity around her. She saw the usual faces, customers being treated like royalty, salespeople making small talk with ease. The gleaming cars sat there, silent and untouchable, symbols of a luxury Maria could only dream of owning. But now, they seemed like something Far darker, a facade that hid the ugly truth of the business, the truth that Naomi had just uncovered. Maria had always believed she was just doing her job, that she had no choice but to follow the rules. But Naomi's calm presence, her quiet resolve, had cracked that illusion wide open. Maria had been complicit in something far worse than she ever realized. She had seen it, felt it, but she'd done nothing. Not anymore, she told herself. With a shaky breath, Maria dialed Naomi back. The phone rang twice before Naomi's voice answered, smooth and steady, as if she were already prepared for this call. Maria. Maria hesitated, her voice faltering. I want to help. I'm not just going to stand by anymore. There was a brief pause on the other end, as if Naomi were taking a moment to consider her words. Then, with quiet determination, Naomi responded. Good. We need people who are willing to fight, but this isn't going to be easy. Are you ready for that? Maria swallowed hard, the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy blanket. Ready? She wasn't sure, but she knew she couldn't go back. I'm ready. Back in the office, Richard Langford stood by the window, his fingers twitching as he clenched and unclenched his fists. The company he had worked for, the system he had built, everything was under threat. Naomi Caldwell was poking at the carefully constructed facade of exclusivity, and he couldn't afford to let her dismantle everything he'd worked so hard to control. The meeting with the board had been tense. They'd all heard Naomi's accusations, seen the video she had leaked. Richard had been quick to dismiss it as an isolated incident, an unfortunate misunderstanding, but the cracks were beginning to show. Naomi wasn't just a CEO. She was a threat, one that could tear down everything he had worked for, and he wasn't about to let that happen. He reached for his phone, dialed a number, and leaned back in his chair as he waited for the call to connect. Langford, came the clipped voice on the other end. It's Richard, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I need you to move quickly. Naomi's making waves, and I need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end replied, You think it's time to take action? Yes. We need to discredit her before she gets too much traction. Plant a seed of doubt. Make this look like a corporate power grab. Make it look like she's the one behind the scandal. Another pause. Then, a cold voice responded, Consider it done. Richard's eyes narrowed as he hung up the phone. He wasn't going down without a fight. Naomi may have caught him off guard, but he would make sure she'd regret ever crossing him. Maria's mind raced as she walked back to her desk. The weight of the decision she had made was heavy, but it was also liberating in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a purpose now, something bigger than her fear, something that was worth fighting for. But what had she just stepped into? The showroom hummed around her, the routine of the day continuing as though nothing had changed. But Maria felt it now, the undercurrent of tension, the weight of the system she had been a part of, and the realization that she was no longer going to let it slide. She looked across the showroom floor, at the smiling salespeople, at the customers walking in and out, blissfully unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. For the first time, Maria didn't feel like she was part of the system. She was on the outside, watching it crumble from within. Her thoughts were interrupted when Richard Langford walked past her, his presence like a storm cloud. He was on edge, his jaw tight, his eyes darting around as if he was looking for someone to blame. His eyes met hers for a brief second, and she quickly turned her head, pretending to focus on the tablet in front of her. Her heart raced as she tried to keep her composure, the tension between them thick and palpable. Richard's footsteps echoed in her mind as she watched him disappear into his office, and Maria knew that things were about to escalate. He was a man who thrived on control, on maintaining his power. Naomi's challenge had rattled him, and Richard Langford wasn't the type to back down easily. He would fight dirty. Maria could feel it in her bones, and now Naomi had put her in the middle of it. Naomi sat in her hotel room, the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. The press conference was coming up, and she could feel the storm brewing. The video she had released was already making waves, but she knew that Richard Langford wouldn't go down without a fight. The company was his empire, built on his vision of exclusivity and power. If she wanted to break it, she would have to be smart. She dialed Daniel's number. The phone rang once, then twice before he picked up. "Naomi, what's the situation?" "I'm preparing for the press conference," she said, her voice calm but determined. "I need you to gather everything, proof, footage, and any internal documents we can use. This isn't just about Caldwell Motors anymore. It's about changing the entire industry." "Understood," Daniel replied. "I'm on it." Naomi hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the city below. She had spent her entire life fighting for a place at the table, for the right to prove her worth. But now the fight was no longer just about her. It was about every person who had been treated like less than, every customer who had been silently pushed aside because they didn't fit the mold. And Naomi was done playing by the rules. It was time to rewrite them. The day of the press conference arrived, and Naomi stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The cameras were rolling, reporters gathered in front of her, their eyes trained on her every move. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. She stepped onto the stage with a calm that only came from years of preparation, her gaze steady as she took in the sea of faces. "Good afternoon," Naomi began, her voice steady, yet carrying the weight of the truth. "I want to thank you all for being here today. I wish I could say this was just another routine press event, but the reality is far more serious." The room fell silent, the tension palpable as Naomi continued. "For decades, Caldwell Motors has been a leader in the luxury automotive industry, built on the promise of excellence, prestige, and accessibility for all. But recently, I uncovered something deeply troubling, something that goes against everything this company stands for. A system of discrimination embedded in our sales practices." Gasps rippled through the room as Naomi gestured toward the screen behind her. The video began to play. The footage of Naomi being dismissed, followed immediately by a white customer being welcomed and treated like royalty. "This is not just an isolated incident," Naomi said, her voice unwavering. "It's a pattern, it's a culture, and it's unacceptable. We are facing a systemic issue, one that needs to be addressed head-on, not just within Caldwell Motors, but across the entire luxury automotive industry." The questions started, flooding in, but Naomi stood tall, unflinching. This was her moment. The battle had only just begun, but Naomi Caldwell wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. As Naomi stepped down from the podium, the room was filled with a buzz of disbelief and intrigue. The press conference had gone exactly as she had planned. Her message was clear, her evidence undeniable. The video of her being dismissed at the showroom, contrasted with the preferential treatment given to a white customer, had sent shockwaves through the room. Naomi had exposed the hidden truth. Caldwell Motors, a company she had built on the principles of equality and accessibility, had become a breeding ground for racial discrimination. But Naomi's victory didn't end with the press conference. It was only the beginning. That night, the headlines exploded. Naomi Caldwell exposes racial bias at Caldwell Motors. Luxury car industry faces reckoning. The world was watching. But Naomi didn't revel in the chaos. She knew that true change was never achieved with one move. It was a long, slow, painful process. The world needed to see the cracks in the system before it could be repaired, and Naomi was ready to do the hard work. The following days were a blur. Maria Torres, the young employee from the showroom, had become an unexpected ally. She had stepped forward, revealing everything she knew, and Naomi knew that her courage had been the turning point. Maria had taken a risk, one that could have cost her everything, but she had chosen to fight for what was right. Naomi offered Maria a position on her reform team, overseeing the new training and compliance initiatives. Together, they would ensure that Caldwell Motors not only survived this scandal, but emerged stronger. As the weeks passed, the changes Naomi had demanded began to take root. The company implemented mandatory training for all employees, focusing on eliminating bias and fostering a culture of inclusivity. Leadership at key showroom locations was replaced, and new policies were put in place to ensure that every customer, regardless of race or background, was treated with the respect they deserved. Naomi knew that this was just the first step, but it was a critical one. The company was evolving, and with it, so was the industry. Richard Langford, on the other hand, had been removed from his position. The board had voted overwhelmingly in favor of his termination, and the internal investigation confirmed the depth of his discriminatory practices. Caldwell Motors had to rebuild its image, and Naomi was determined to lead it into a new era, one where integrity and fairness were more important than the image of exclusivity that Richard had so carefully cultivated. Naomi's journey had not been easy. She had fought against forces far greater than herself, and there had been moments when the weight of the battle had threatened to break her. But through it all, she had remained steadfast in her belief that real change was possible. She had been tested in ways she hadn't imagined, but each challenge had only strengthened her resolve. She had proven that one person, armed with the truth, could dismantle an entire system of injustice. As Naomi sat in her office, looking out at the skyline of New York, she thought about everything she had overcome. She had started with nothing, but a dream and a fierce determination to break barriers. Now she had built a legacy, not just as the CEO of Caldwell Motors, but as a leader who had changed an entire industry. The fight wasn't over, but Naomi knew one thing for sure. The world was changing, and she was going to keep pushing, keep fighting, until every door was open to those who deserved a seat at the table. Maria walked into her office, a folder of reports in hand. She set it on the desk and smiled at Naomi. The first wave of evaluations is in. We're at 87% compliance. There's still resistance, but it's working. Naomi looked at Maria, a smile tugging at her lips. Good, she said, feeling the weight of the moment. You're doing something that matters, Maria. We're changing the game. Maria sat down, her eyes full of determination. I never thought I'd be a part of something like this. I always thought the system was too big to fight, that it would crush us. But now I see it's only big because we've let it be. Naomi nodded, her gaze steady. Change doesn't come from the people who stay silent. It comes from the ones who decide, enough is enough. And you're part of that change. The two women sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared mission hanging in the air. Naomi had done what she set out to do. She had exposed the truth, fought for justice, and made sure that the voices of those who had been silenced were finally heard. And as the sun began to set over the city, Naomi Caldwell knew that this was only the beginning. The battle for equality was far from over, but she was no longer fighting alone. Together with people like Maria, together with everyone who had been touched by this fight, Naomi was ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes, the biggest victories don't happen in boardrooms or courtrooms. They happen when people refuse to accept injustice as the way things are. And Naomi Caldwell had proven that no matter the odds, change was possible.